It's Wednesday, October 30th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, a very newsy day to be talking ball. And joining me to do just that is Sal Vetri. Sal, what's going on, buddy?
Yeah, not much. Yeah, a ton of breaking news to discuss. It's the time of season where it's just the season, and if your teams are absolutely screwed and which teams are looking good, and you can just focus on those moving forward.
Yes, you're right about that. I do think that there's a lot of clarity for fantasy managers, right? Is this team a contender? Do I need to start stacking, some upside bets for the playoffs? Do I need to start making some trades and maybe get that last bit of push to really be a good fantasy team? In the NFL, I always feel like we have like faux clarity at this very moment where, okay, we think the dust is settled. We know which teams are good. And as my good buddy Sigmund Bloom always says, I know I quote this a lot on the podcast, but you can be right and wrong about a player in the course of the season. And that's definitely true for these teams where we feel like we know where teams are, but that is not always the case, especially when big news happens in the middle of the week like it did here heading into week 9. So we have 3 big storylines to talk about here at the top of the show before we get into our usual business with the data dump, your moves to make, everything like that. Let's start off with this first one. Anthony Richardson benched for Joe Flacco. And I think this is notable. The way it was pitched by the insiders was he is being benched for Sunday Night Football against the Minnesota Vikings. Sal, there's a lot to talk about with Anthony Richardson being benched for Joe Flacco. I don't know if we want to get into kind of the real football ramifications of this. Nate Tice and I are going to have a whole breakdown on that about football on Football 301 that people can listen to. But from a fantasy perspective, Richardson out, Joe Flacco in. What does this mean?
Yeah, from a fantasy perspective, I'm feeling really good about my Josh Downs teams, my Michael Pittman teams, my any Colts pass catchers teams just got a little bit more life. And the way that you phrase that for Sunday night is key. Like, is this a rest of a season thing? I lean probably not, but it really all depends on how Joe Flacco plays. You see Jameis Winston this past week take over an offense, look great, and those fans loved it, and they're getting just rejuvenated, and now Jameis Winston is the starter moving forward. Joe Flacco has already done that at one point this season. If he does it again for this Colts team like he did for a Browns team last year, it's going to be hard for the organization to say, we're in a position where we can make the playoffs. Let's sit Joe Flacco. So I think it does come down to like what happens on Sunday. If he looks good, I think they're going to have to continue putting Joe Flacco out there for the time being. And in that situation, everything looks good. Josh Downs and Michael Pittman have had their 3 best games of the season with Joe Flacco from a target share and overall receptions volume standpoint. You're looking at Josh Downs not finishing worse as a top 20 receiver in any of those 3 games. Michael Pittman averaging a wide receiver 24 finish. His averages with Anthony Richardson, wide receiver 60. So even if he's dealing with this back injury, we'll see what happens with that. It seems like he's okay now, a week or 2 removed from that. Even Michael Pittman gets a boost. So I think these guys get a boost, but it's not yet set in stone that this will be a rest of season move.
Yeah, that's how I feel too, is that I'm not sure how long this is going to last. It's worth noting, Joe Flacco, the vaunted Joe Flacco-led Indianapolis Colts lost to the Jaguars in week 5. Like that's where I think a little bit of the short-sightedness comes from this, is that I don't think the Colts are necessarily some ready-made playoff team. And Flacco was good in that game. The offense was good in that game. The problem is that the defense stinks on the other side. And I do still think the defense might be getting a little bit better, but overall I'm still not 100% sure this is a playoff team just because Joe Flacco is back there. So that's where I think a little bit of the short-sightedness maybe comes into play here. Although I get it. The whole tapping out thing, helmet tap gate, he comes off on 3rd down. I think that has annoyed veterans in the locker room. So again, Nate and I did a whole breakdown on that on Football 301, like the real life ramifications of it. So we won't get into a ton of that here, but I will say a couple things on the fantasy side of things. 100%, yes. Josh Downs, who I think has been the best wide receiver on this team this season by a significant margin. You look last week watching the film from this team against the Texans, the perimeter receivers were a problem for Indianapolis. Alec Pierce has had his moments, but he's a role player who only does a few handful of things. A.D. Mitchell is still developing as a rookie. Even Michael Pittman, I would just push back on the one thing about like Michael Pittman from this back injury. I do think he's still dealing with that. Remember he was about to go on IR and then it was like, he's actually going to tough it through this thing. He did not have a good game against the Texans last week. Is that because of the back injury? Is he still playing through that? Maybe, but I would say that he hasn't necessarily had his best moments as an individual the last 3 weeks, even putting Anthony Richardson aside. That being said, if he gets a little healthier, although I always say ain't nobody used to have a bad back. Once you have a bad back, you have a bad back. I do, that is a little bit like in the back of my mind here, but maybe a couple more weeks removed, he gets back on track. But in the meantime, Minnesota Vikings, a blitz heavy team. You have to imagine a lot of underneath passes are going to Josh Downs in this game.
Yeah, I feel good about Josh Downs. Like, no matter who it's been out there, if it's Richardson or Flacco, he leads the team in target share. For this specific week, a 28% target share he's earned. That is a team high from Flacco this season. And the volume at this point just feels pretty secure. Like, if you're going to look at the betting markets, they haven't adjusted yet, but my guess is he's going to come in around 5.5 receptions. And for fantasy, that's an instant starter in almost all situations.
Yeah, otherwise, again, I think we're a little more interested in these depth wide receivers, but need to see more from any of them if we're going to start starting them in the Joe Flacco era, however long this lasts. Yeah, if he wins this game against the Vikings, I definitely think we could see him again against the Bills, Jets, but it is a tougher schedule here, so we could see Anthony Richardson again. My gut is with you, Sal, that I think we do see Richardson again. But for now, yeah, Josh Downs is the one guy I think that becomes a must start. Everybody else, even Pittman to me, although maybe you're a little more certain about Pittman. To me, even Pittman is still a little bit of a maybe, but we'll see what happens here going forward with this team.
Yeah, I think so. I'm maybe a little bit higher on Pittman. The other thing I'll point out is that Jonathan Taylor probably just gets a little bit more of a floor from the receiving game department with Anthony Richardson out, at least for this week. We already view Taylor as an RB1 week in and week out, but if you are a fantasy manager now of him, you could feel pretty secure that you're probably seeing like 2 reception games moving forward out of Jonathan Taylor as long as Flacco's the starter.
Let's stick in the AFC South and go to the second piece of big news that we got today on Tuesday. Stefon Diggs is out for the year with a torn ACL. It took a bit to figure this out, right? As of Monday, it was said that Diggs was still being evaluated, according to D'Amico Ryans. Well, now we know the evaluation comes back with a torn ACL out for the year. This really stinks for Steph Diggs, who part of the trade to go to Houston, they wiped out the rest of his contract. So he's going to be a free agent after the year. He's going to be coming off a torn ACL a little bit deeper into his career. So definitely what happens next with Diggs is a big question here. But man, it's a bummer, Sal. We're just never going to see this Texans wide receiver trio at full strength at any point this season. But what's the fallout from this one here from a fantasy perspective?
Yeah, the fallout's not straightforward because we have this team in week 9 on a short week. So like, how much are they going to adjust? Still without Nico Collins, they play Thursday night. Now without Stefon Diggs, like how much can they adjust to getting guys like Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie, Robert Woods, the remaining wide receivers behind Tank Dell in this offense? Can they really get them that much involved? Like, it leads me to believe in a fine matchup for Joe Mixon, they might just lean on this guy for 20 plus more touches on Thursday night. Get into week 10 when you get Nico Collins back. Then you have Nico Collins and Tank Dell. That's probably how the wide receivers in the offense will go moving forward, in my opinion. I don't really see like a third name being brought up here or like really coming to life. John Mechie has had a nice pedigree as a college prospect, 2nd round pick out of Alabama, had a nice career there, but he came into the NFL with a knee injury. Then he ends up having cancer, getting diagnosed with cancer, takes out his rookie year. So that's been complicated for him getting back to the football field. And then Xavier Hutchinson is a guy who was a college football finalist for best wide receiver in the country in his final year. Like, this guy was earning targets nonstop, but so far it hasn't translated to the NFL in his limited opportunities. So it's hard to get excited about any of those guys and hard to really see anything changing in the short term. I think once Nico is back, he continues to be an alpha, and then Tank Dell just sees the biggest boost and biggest win here, I would say, moving forward is for Tank Dell.
Yeah, Tank Dell definitely the biggest winner. Although, even with Diggs out of the game for a big chunk of last week, he still doesn't see a high target total. And like I've said all year, I think we still haven't gotten all the way back to same explosive separation rookie season Tank Dell. Now we're getting deeper into the year. We're getting kind of closer to that area where, Tony Pollard coming off a similar injury, although of course Tony Pollard wasn't shot in the offseason like Tank Dell was shot in the offseason. Keep having to bring that up. This is right around the area that Tony Pollard said, like, yeah, week 11 started to when I started to feel a little bit more like myself. So maybe, again, we're getting closer to Tank Dell being ramped all the way back up. I will say couple of really nice routes in that game last week against the Colts. The touchdown catch was one of the more just technically refined pieces of wide receiver artistry along the boundary in the back of the end zone that you're going to see. So I'm hopeful that we get more of Tank Dell. I do think if there's no Diggs and there's no Nico Collins in this one, he is a fantasy starter. The other guys on the roster, it's worth noting that the last 3 weeks, they've actually played a lot more 2 tight end sets. So like you look at the route participation, it's been Tank Dell number 1, Steph Diggs number 2, Dalton Schultz number 3, Xavier Hutchinson number 4, who's played a little bit of big slot for them, but is also still primarily a perimeter receiver. And then Cade Stover has been the fifth player in terms of route participation among wide receivers and tight ends. So there's not necessarily, I don't think we're going to get deep into the bag for the wide receivers here, although Hutchinson will probably be the guy that takes the other starting spot in this game. I'm with you, though. I like whatever the over is on carries for Joe Mixon, I'm probably going to be betting that on Thursday night.
Yeah, my guess is that thing, like, they rarely ever go over like 17 and a half, maybe 18 and a half, but all of those feel pretty good for Joe Mixon, who it's just kind of like a let's get to week 10, let's get to Nico Collins back, and we'll regroup from there. I think that's your best way to kind of do it.
Yeah. Just one last thought on this is I've given Bobby Slowick kind of a hard time for the way that this offense has felt this year, some of the protection plans, a few of the other issues here. This team is having to do a lot of like, snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap in terms of their identity, right? Because I do think they wanted to come out this year and be a very pass-heavy 11 personnel team. You lose Nico, Tank Dell's not all the way right. So now we're back to 12 personnel, which is kind of what we were last year. More heavy set stuff, more, rushing attack. It's just we just have never really gotten the full strength Texans. So I don't think CJ Stroud's a fantasy starter this week necessarily. Tank Dell's probably the only guy in the passing game that I feel pretty good about right now.
Yeah, only guy I feel pretty good about, Joe Mixon in a smash spot, and just even puts more emphasis, in my opinion, on like deeper leagues, or really all leagues at this point. Like Dameon Pierce should probably be rostered in a lot more leagues than he currently is, because Joe Mixon has already missed time, and it looks like they're probably going to feature the run game at least more than they plan to coming into the year.
Final piece of news here to note: Panthers trade Diontae Johnson and a 6th round pick to the Ravens for a 5th round pick. So this is basically just a pick swap, and the Ravens get Diontae Johnson, who leaves behind a hapless Carolina Panthers team going nowhere. Panthers are going to have to hope that, Xavier Legette and Jalen Coker really hit the rest of the way, because otherwise they're going to be looking at another rookie quarterback next year with nobody to throw to. So that's a whole nother conversation. But this one is a bit of a tough not to untangle here from a fantasy perspective in Baltimore, Sal. I wrote about this for the site, so people can go read the piece if they want, but I'm not sure how to feel about this, again, purely from fantasy, because obviously for real life, Ravens get another playmaker on the cheap here. Why not? You're already a great offense. Add another separator. Sure. But what do you think this does to both Diontae Johnson and, of course, the other guys there in Baltimore?
Yeah, my initial thoughts are I believe this is a slight bump, like maybe the slightest of bumps for Diontae Johnson. And that sounds crazy because, yeah, real life, as of right now, he goes from the 32nd ranked offense in the NFL to the number 1 ranked offense. It got as good as it possibly could, only lasted 8 games in Carolina, and he said, see you later. So I think this is honestly, though, not that big of an upgrade in terms of fantasy, because he's going into an offense that's passing the ball less than 30 times per game right now. Like, we know Derrick Henry's there. We know this is kind of the offense always Lamar Jackson has been in, a low pass volume offense. And this is a guy who earns 26% of his team's targets in his career. Obviously, the far majority of that has been with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it's been across so many different quarterbacks now. I mean, we're talking 6 or 7 different quarterbacks in his career, continues to earn elite numbers in terms of targets because he separates versus man coverage. He gets open, and that's what quarterbacks like. So he goes into this offense. I think he's going to continue to earn his targets, but instead of seeing, 25 to 28 to 30% of the targets as like a high number in an offense that could be throwing the ball 35 to 40 times a game, this is now going into one that's probably going to be leaning closer to 27, 28 pass attempts a game most weeks, which just hurts his overall volume upside, but maybe a couple more touchdowns, a couple more efficient passes going his way downfield. So I can kind of see it being a wash. But I do think this hurts guys like Zay Flowers, because you're seeing weeks where he's getting 8, 9, 10 targets in a game. I have to imagine now that's dropping by at least 1 to 2 targets per game in his projections moving forward. And if he's losing targets, he's losing fantasy points and potential, so that definitely hurts him. So that's where my head goes right away. Rashad Bateman comes off the field more, so that obviously hurts him. I think slight bump up for Diontae Johnson based on offensive environment. And the rest of the guys here, I have to say they get a tick down.
Yeah, it's hard to avoid thinking that there's going to be a tick down for some of these guys here. I mean, the only one that people are starting Mark Andrews again. Of course, we just took him out of the coping corner, and this is maybe a bit of a slight hit to him, but it's not as if anyone here other than Zay Flowers was getting consistent volume. I mean, Rashad Bateman has been super, drops aside this past week, but he's been super efficient on his touches. I mean, he's 4th in the NFL in EPA per target, and he's 4th in the NFL in percentage of target or catches that have gone for a first down or touchdown. He's been, when they've gone to him, a good player, but from a fantasy angle, he's a tough guy to start because it's super volatile. He's only going to get like 4 or 5 targets a week. Now he might get 3, 4 targets a week at this point. even Andrews wasn't necessarily getting it done on volume. It's been based on touchdowns. Zay Flowers is the one with a 27% target share. That's got to come down. And I think Flowers is a good player. I've liked that we've finally gotten away from the heavy screen Mickey Mouse route usage in the first few weeks. We're actually getting him on real deal down the field routes, but he's not really a true number one receiver either. Diontae is kind of maybe on that fringes, but you mentioned the volume. He was targeted on 27% of his routes this year, which is a top 12 mark at wide receiver among guys who have actually run 100 plus routes this year. He's going to be open. I'm not, and with how much the Ravens get cover one, because teams want to stack the box, so they get that single high safety. They have, even though they have a scrambling quarterback, the Ravens have faced the 8th most man coverage this year, according to Fantasy Points data. I just can't imagine that like Diontae is not going to eat in those situations. Like, this is the type of guy, and this is why they were getting Bateman so many of those downfield chances too, because he's a great separator against man coverage. Now you've got a guy in here who's more of a high volume player than a Bateman necessarily. So yeah, it's probably not a win for Johnson in fantasy because he's leaving behind so much volume, even though the situation was going to go to hell in Carolina anyways. I don't know, man. It definitely is a bit of a hit for everybody here in fantasy from a passing game perspective.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I'm looking at Diontae Johnson before this trade happened with the outlook that he was going to be on the Carolina Panthers, and he's around guys in my rankings like Ladd McConkey, DeAndre Hopkins, George Pickens is like the tier above with Jalen Waddle. It's hard to put him above those guys. Like, how is he going ahead of George Pickens right now? Jalen Waddle, I can maybe see an argument. I think the only thing that really happens here is the weekly, I guess you can say, like, floor rises a little bit because of the offense he's in, because they're going to go more red zone drives, more touchdown potential. And the rest of those guys, like you were saying, they're just going to drop. The 27% target share for Zay Flowers, I don't see how that doesn't fall when you're dropping in one of the best target earners in the NFL. Literally, since he entered the NFL, he's top 10 at earning targets, total targets earned for Diontae Johnson. That's just not going to be something you can't take seriously when he's replacing 15% target share guy in Rashad Bateman.
Yeah. It seems like both these guys will be wide receiver 3 candidates, and I'm not sure like how they're both going to go off in a given week. So Flowers is already somebody that people were a little bit like, oh, how do I predict when his big weeks are coming? Now you probably feel that way about both him and Diontae Johnson, but man, putting that aside for a second, dude, what an awesome offense that this Ravens team is. They're already second in passing success rate. They're already second in overall offensive success rate this year. How are they not even better now, again, with Diontae Johnson getting in the mix? So great trade for them. Good trade for Diontae, who has a chance to like recoup a lot of value here because he's on the last year of his contract, and he gets 2 revenge games against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Those will definitely be some toxic online games. But anything else, Sal, before we move on here?
No, nothing on the Baltimore side unless you want to touch on the Carolina side of what this leaves them out there for the Panthers.
I mean, I really, really like how they've used Xavier Legette this year. He's still a bit of a project guy, but I like the way they've used him. I think they've gotten the best out of him so far. I think they're going to hit on him to some degree. Jalen Coker is a dude. That guy can play. He's like a legit power slot receiver candidate. He's impressed me on film. It's just, we're going to get Bryce Young probably back. Bryce Young started last week. You imagine they're probably going to go back to him at some point because they're clearly looking to the future. But I don't know. It's not the best soil to be growing fantasy crops at this point in Carolina.
Yeah, I completely agree. The only thing that I'll say, though, is if you're listening to this and your waivers were most likely have already cleared, odds are Jalen Coker's available in any 12-team format, like over 80 to 90% of them. It's at least worth adding and seeing what happens for 1 week. Like you saw production last week out of him, 70, 80 yards and a touchdown. A lot of that on the final drive, a complete garbage time drive in the game. But he's been out there for at least 50% of the snaps the past month of the season. And this is a later round rookie. Like, this is a guy that I do believe can come into an offense and give you some flex-worthy weeks if you're looking for a guy in like your 12 to 14 team leagues. It's at least worth seeing for a week or two and then drop him. It'll cost you most likely nothing.
Yeah, I dig it. I just hope that Adam Thielen doesn't come back and they make him the power slot, but we'll see what happens. So I like it. Hopefully we get some more stuff out of these rookies rest of the way because, again, like I said, Panthers are going to need them to step up. But with that, 3 big pieces of news here. Let's waste no more time. Let's get into the Week 9 data dump.
Yes, science!
My calculations are correct. You're going to see some serious...
Little reminder for the people out there, we're going to do something different in this episode. For our 5th and final stat, Sal and I each have a secret stat. So maybe we can try to guess just by laying out the conditions, the statistics around a certain player, who the other person is trying to highlight. So Sal, I'm going to have you go first. Kick me off with your first stat that the people need to know here on the Wednesday Data Dump.
Yeah, I want to look at the Bengals offense this season in 3 games without their wide receiver, two, T. Higgins. And in these 3 games, you've seen the efficiency drop off a cliff. And it's kind of been seen and talked about a little bit, but specifically Joe Burrow, yards per attempt, decent judge of efficiency for a quarterback in their games. Week 1, 5.7 yards per attempt. That's well below the NFL average. Week 2 without T. Higgins, 7.2 yards per attempt, about league average. And then this past week in week 8, 6.3 yards per attempt, again below the NFL average. They've lost all 3 of those games. Burrow is averaging nearly 60 yards passing less per game without Higgins. And of course, some of this makes sense. Like, you're missing your number 2 receiver. The offense is probably going to struggle, especially when he's as good as T. Higgins, quietly leading this team ahead of Jamar Chase in target share and downfield usage this year. But it just really shines a light on this offense needs T. Higgins. It also needs Jamar Chase, but it needs these guys because you see it now in 3 games. There's more attention on Jamar Chase. Andre Yoshevich, he's only averaging 11 yards per game in these 3 games without T. Higgins. Oof. And then they have to rely on guys like Mike Gesicki more, which from like a fantasy box score, it looks cool when he puts up these 6-7 reception games. But from an actual real life standpoint, he's kind of a tell when he's on the field. You're probably not running the ball. If you do when he's on the field, you're running efficiency, likely dropping a little bit, not the best run blocker. And it's not somebody you want to rely on as your middle of the field target all year, the number 2 option when Jamar Chase sees a little more attention. So from a fantasy takeaway, it's just, to me, if you have T. Higgins on your team, feel really good. Be patient with these midweek injuries. I think he's somebody rest of season that's probably a top 30 to 35 overall player and looking as a very strong piece to this team. And then just hold out on Joe Burrow because the splits without T. Higgins have not been good. With him, a lot better. We're talking easily a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. I just think right now is like the best leverage point for T. Higgins and his agent this offseason. Hey, look at me off the field these 3 games and what it's been like.
I mean, shoot, I have felt this way all season. I don't know how they get it done, just from a contract standpoint, because they're paying Burrow, they're going to pay Jamar Chase, and you also could argue that, well, yeah, great, they've had these guys on the field together for the most part. Obviously, T. Higgins, as you point out, has missed time here, but for the most part, they've had these 3 guys on the field for the majority of the games, and they're often, and like their team still isn't very good because their defense is horribly, undermanned on that side of it. And so from a roster building perspective, how the hell are they going to, they got to do something about that, right? Because they can't start, they keep missing on draft picks over there. It's a whole thing. So I can't quite square that in my head, but at the same time, I watch this team play, Sal, and I'm like, how does this team ever in the future envision itself as anything other than we're Joe Burrow, we're Jamar Chase, and we're T. Higgins, and we're just trying to like drop bombs all over the field?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's like a much more nuance to this. There's, of course, draft picks that can come into play here. There's free agent signings that they can make if they let T. Higgins walk. But the way that it's looking right now, I think they know how much of a factor he is to this offense. And I think they're going to make that a priority in the offseason.
Yeah, for sure. When I look at the other players on this roster, too, I think that you mentioned Yoshevich, 11 yards per game. I have Yoshevich on a couple teams. I'm thinking, all right, T. Higgins is not playing. Maybe I can give a bump to Andre Yoshevich, but the problem is that it does cause like a cascading effect in this offense. When Higgins is out, they've mostly kicked Yoshevich to the outside, which I don't know that he necessarily wins there as much as he does as kind of that bigger slot receiver. Just in the last 3 games alone, he's taken more snaps out wide than in the slot has Andre Yoshevich. And then you mentioned Mike Gesicki. He kind of becomes their slot receiver, even though he's a tight end in name only. He becomes their slot. I kind of think at some point, like, I know they must have trust issues with the player, but I would like to see more Jermaine Burton at some point. Guy's got legit juice. I think he could bring something to this team. Maybe he's like a post-bye rookie bump candidate. Maybe they start to get him ramped up there, but their bye week isn't until week 12. They've got games against the Raiders, the Raiders, the Ravens, and then the Chargers in weeks 9 to 11. Chargers defense is good. The Ravens defense is obviously beatable on the back end. We've seen these 2 teams put up a lot of points against each other previously this year. But yeah, I don't know. The Bengals offense has been a tough one for me, man, because it's just I feel like this unit should be a lot better than it has been, at least in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I think that's a good shout on Burton. This past week, he actually ran 43% of the routes, which was the most he's seen in a game all year, including the first 2 weeks when Higgins was out. I don't even think he's been over like 15% on the season. So that's a good shout for a player just rest of season, especially if this Higgins injury lingers. They're calling it day-to-day, but if he misses another week, maybe a filler for you heading into week 9.
Yeah, T. Higgins matters. It'll be interesting to see what happens with T. Higgins with this team going forward. Again, it's something I keep finding myself thinking about every single time these guys take the field. All right, let's move to your second point here. Miami Dolphins running back Devon Achane.
Yeah, Devon Achane, he's had now 3 games with Tua. Tua returns in week 8, and in those 3 games, he's finished no worse than the running back 3. Overall, he's the running back 1. If you just take that 3-game sample, we're talking about the small samples, 137 total yards per game, 21 touches per game for this guy. Now, when you look at the actual underlying data, 58% of the snaps and 59% of the backfield opportunities this past week. Now, like, if you're into fantasy football, you're like, okay, that's like fine numbers, close to a 50-50 backfield. I'm used to that. That's not fine numbers for Devon Achane. That is fantastic numbers. You look back to last year when he was the running back 5 overall, playing 43% of the snaps and barely cracking 40% of the opportunities. I mean, the whole goal this offseason was obviously Tua stays healthy. He's now back. And number 2, if we could see Achane just see 50% of the touches in this backfield and opportunities, he's going to go to the moon. And he's seeing well over that right now. Now, how much does this continue moving forward? We'll see. But right now, everything looks really good in this backfield for Achane. I think he's right around Jonathan Taylor, if we're talking about guys rest of season, pushing towards that RB5, top 5 overall player at the position. I feel really good if you were somebody who was able to buy low on Achane the past couple of weeks. You're sitting pretty heading into the fantasy postseason.
Yeah, and 8 targets for 6 catches and 50 yards in this last game, 7 for 76 as a receiver in week 1, 7 targets, 7 catches, 69 yards and a touchdown in week 2. That receiving role, when Tua has been on the field specifically, has been pretty incredible. I don't know. I don't really know like what that is, that why when Tua's out there, Achane becomes so much more activated as a receiver. I know he obviously has had the concussion in this span of time too, so maybe they just didn't want to overload him, something like that. I'm speaking about Achane specifically, but maybe it's also just like Snoop Huntley. Tyler Huntley's not a guy that's going to check the ball down. He's probably going to take off scrambling. And I think Tua, probably reads things out a little bit better and can be like, okay, coverage wise, I'm looking to Achane here. I'd have to actually sit there and watch, like, are they maximizing him more as a receiver? Because that has been the thing that, like, in the offseason, Sal, we talked about, at least I know I talked about this, that if he was going to meet his gaudy ADP, he had to have a touch boost overall. But I think a lot of that was going to have to come in the receiving game. We've definitely seen that when Tua has been on the field.
Yeah, and it could be just a small sample stuff, but it could also be the fact that, defenses are just playing these quarterbacks differently, and that's leaving a check down, or these quarterbacks who are filling in for Tua just naturally feel more comfortable checking the ball down if it's open than taking that shot downfield, and maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I think rest of season right now, and when you look at the upcoming matchups for Achane, I mean, Bills, Rams, Raiders, that Rams defense and their defensive line is getting healthier and looks pretty good this year, especially from a pressure standpoint. But you can run on them. You can run on all 3 of those teams. I think it looks really good moving forward.
What do we make, just real quick, on the Jalen Waddle side of this? Because I know I've gotten a lot of Waddle questions this last week. He has the big game in week 1, but it's only 5 targets. He catches all 5 for 109 yards. Week 2, 4 catches on 4 targets for 41 yards. And then obviously this past week, he still only gets 6 targets, 4 catches for 45 yards. He had 1 drop that could have made this look a lot better. Is Devon Achane's pretty awesome receiving role kind of eating into Jalen Waddle at this point? And to see somebody that we talk about, all right, Tua's back, we bump back up Tyreek. He didn't have a massive game, but I think we can bump him back up to expectations. Sounds like you're saying we can definitely bump Devon Achane, maybe even higher expectations than we thought when he was drafted. Where does that leave Jalen Waddle?
Yeah, I think it leaves him in a spot that's definitely better when Tua wasn't there. Now, it's not the best situation when he comes back and sees, 17% target share, although that was his highest on the season or second highest on the season so far. Generally speaking, I feel fine about Waddle. I'm kind of close to the spot where I think he's a buy low, but he's not like a guy I think is going to move the needle for you from an upside standpoint because of Tyreek, because of Achane on this team. But everything that I'm seeing from him, some of the routes that I watched 2 weeks ago and then leading into this week, it looks good. He looks completely fine. I think it's just more so a pecking order thing to where he might be the third option on this offense, a really good one at that, but it's going to lead to less consistent weeks. You'll still get your 20-plus point weeks, probably 3 more times this year, just not as consistently getting those maybe 14 to 15-point weeks.
Yeah, it just feels like the boom bust wide receiver range it feels harsher than ever this year because we've had so many wide receivers wiped off the board. I think some of the guys that would have been consistent producers, like a Godwin, like a Rashee Rice, probably even Nico Collins was, he was producing as consistently as anybody up at the top of the wide receiver pecking order. We're having to kind of juggle and count on some of these guys that I think are going to naturally be more boom bust. And that's just sort of the way I think it's going to be with the rest of the season at this position.
Yeah, and I think there's something, I don't know how to evaluate this, and it's just a thought that comes to mind, but Tua, obviously, just in terms of being not as mobile right now, they don't want him taking any hit at all. I wonder if there's anything going on in his mechanics that's just like, if my first read's out there, maybe not even my second, where's Devon Achane? Where's Raheem Mostert starting the running game? Just get this ball out quick. Now, obviously, when the bullets are flying, maybe he's not thinking like that, but maybe that's just something they're trying to get into his head, like, don't go through all of your reads. If Waddle's like the third read on this play, he's just not getting the ball.
Yeah, I bet there could be a lot more. Yeah, and again, I'd have to sit down and like actually evaluate the offense, stuff like that. I bet there's a lot more like high-low concepts where one of these receivers, and it's almost always going to be Tyreek, not Jalen Waddle, is your number one read on like a high-low concept, and Achane's that low guy because that's not really Jalen Waddle's game. I mean, you could get him yards after catch, manufactured opportunities, but probably from a check down perspective, they clearly like Achane in this role, and that's a guy you want to get the football to. So, like sometimes, again, I'm sure you get these questions too, Sal. It's like, what's going on with Jalen Waddle? It's like probably nothing. There's probably nothing. I still think I'm with you. I think from a film perspective, he looks good. I was really high on him from an individual player's perspective coming into the year. I think he had, in isolation, like as an individual player, his best season last year, but the efficiency just wasn't always there because he was kind of on and off the field. Now that they've got Achane kind of stepping up too, it's almost like instead of a big 2, it's a big 3. And it's just, the pie is only so big, man. Like there's only one football to go around.
Yeah, anytime a running back's going to push towards a 20%, 22% target share certain weeks, like probably the wide receiver 2 on the team is just going to get squeezed.
Yeah, and that is where we're at right now. Well, we're certainly interested in some wide receivers in this next offense that you want to talk about, especially now that we have a quarterback change.
Yeah, and it's Jameis Winston with the Browns in his first start, looking at some of the target shares here. We have Elijah Moore leading the room with a 30% target share, according to Fantasy Life's data. Cedric Tillman at 24% target share. That was 9 targets, 11 for Moore. Jerry Jeudy with 22%, and then David Njoku was the only other player on the team above a 3% target share. He had a 16% target share. So a nice condensed target share. All the names we kind of know in this offense, the 3 receivers, really no running backs involved, or a 4th receiver or 2nd tight end. So that's good to see. Obviously, a lot of attention is going to go to Cedric Tillman. He has the big game, 2 touchdowns, basically the game-winning touchdown. And now through 2 weeks without Amari Cooper, you're looking at 15 catches for 180 yards, operating as an outside X receiver. Jameis has been named the starter moving forward. Like, that all looks great. He's still available on a ton of waiver wires. By the time you're listening to this, he's probably not now, but that's a guy that I think you could spend $20+, even 25 of your fab, 20% or so or more, and it feels good. But I really want to talk about the other guys here because Elijah Moore is really interesting to me as a player for fantasy that has been, at least I've thought has always been a talented player, and a lot of people I think believe the same thing, just the situations have never been great. I think in week 8 of this past week was maybe like the best quarterback play this guy has ever seen in his life. And I think he was surprised at times because both Elijah Moore and even Jerry Jeudy on some of these routes, like they're getting out of their breaks and Jameis has the ball in their hands. Like they don't even have enough time to get their whole body turned around and the ball is there. And that's not always going to be the case. We know that Jameis can be a little bit of a volatile player, but sometimes that works. And usually for him, it has worked for fantasy. So when I see a 30% target share on an offense that just had over 300 yards passing for the first time this year, went up and down the field and was scoring almost at will behind Jameis, like I get excited for the guy who has a 30% target share, available in 98% of Yahoo leagues right now. So I don't know if you have more on Elijah Moore, but for me, it's somebody that I think is a priority ad as well.
Oh, buddy, I got more on Elijah Moore. You're in some good company here. I have long been a big appreciator of Elijah Moore's game. He is one of these guys that, from a rookie season standpoint in reception perception, had all of like the results I want to bet on. We're talking about a guy who's over 75% success rate versus man. He's over 80% success rate versus zone. That almost regardless of alignment. And I do think he, just from a size perspective, fits more as a slot receiver. The Browns are using him as a slot receiver, but he's not some like Mickey Mouse bullshit touches slot receiver. Like the guy gets open downfield. I'll throw up the route chart for the YouTube viewers from his rookie season in reception perception. The guy can play, man. And I've always maintained that. Now he screwed himself in New York. I always say that he probably didn't need to go on Twitter and complain about touches in the middle of like a 5-game win streak for the New York Jets. Probably should have just let that one lie. And then that just like throws your career completely asunder because then you're now with a new coaching staff who I think had him in a little bit of that Mickey Mouse role, which didn't make a lot of sense. But you're right, man. Anytime he's out there with a guy guy who really can push the ball down the field. Like we saw this in very limited looks with Joe Flacco last year. He had that game when Amari Cooper was out. I think it was against the Rams. He went over 80 yards. He was getting those like downfield targets from Flacco. Then it was the next game against the Jets on Thursday night in his revenge game. He was kind of cooking in that game, and then he had a really scary concussion when he like his. I mean, it was a scary concussion for Elijah Moore at the end of last season. But when he's out there and a guy like a Jameis Winston can push the ball downfield on some of these routes with anticipation, I'm glad that you brought that up. I think I really do. I'm with you. He can play.
Yeah, he can play, and like exactly what you're talking about. It's not Mickey Mouse stuff. Like he was averaging, I think, nearly 10. His ADOT averaged at the target was nearly 10 yards downfield. So that's a guy that has upside on that, especially when he's working out of the slot. And he had 4 targets on third down. Throughout this game, if you just go back and watch all of his targets, Jameis is looking at him when it's either in the face of pressure or if it's a third or fourth down conversion in that game. He was looking more times than not Elijah Moore's way. I mean, overall targets kind of point to that as well. So I think that's something when I'm looking at everybody's going to spend $25 on Cedric Tillman, and that's fine, especially depending on where your team is. But if you can just sneak in with like a $5 bid on Elijah Moore or less, 98% available as of this right now recording, yeah, I think that's somebody that can also be a weekly flex option for you, especially if Jameis continues to look anything like he did in week 8.
Yeah, really good call out. Because I think we agree that the Tillman stuff is real. Like you should spend for Tillman. I think he looks like a big time winner. But the only 2 guys that drew targets, and Jordan Akins has one third, fourth down target from Jameis Winston in week 8. You're right that Tillman and Elijah Moore were the only guys that got a ball on third and fourth down from Jameis Winston. So those high leverage moments, I do think Elijah Moore, I just think Elijah Moore is better than Jerry Jeudy. I thought that coming into the year, Jeudy obviously was ranked higher in fantasy because he had the contract and stuff like that, but nobody was going to get home with Watson. I don't think Jeudy is like a totally useless player or anything. He'll have his moments, but I agree with you. Elijah Moore is a sneaky ad here. I mean, look, I'm buying back in on Elijah Moore. I've made this mistake many, many times. I'm glad Sal, though, is the one that brought it up. Like, Sal created a safe space for me. You didn't even know you were doing it.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. I'm happy to be able to do that for you. But yeah, like Judy's the last guy here to just touch on quickly, like kind of the odd man out. And if people say, like he's on a lot of fantasy benches, will probably stay there most weeks, maybe not during buys. And if people do say like, hey, like, is it Jeudy or Elijah Moore? Why is this one game Elijah Moore seeing more usage or the last 2 weeks? And I just think it's because he's probably a better player. And that's what I'll kind of hang my hat on, at least without diving too deep into the film on it.
Yeah. Well, again, I've dived deep on the film. I'll be saying that, yeah, he is a better player. You're also right, too, that when he was pressured, again, Jameis Winston, the 2 guys that had double-digit targets, according to Fantasy Points data, Tillman, Elijah Moore, those are the only 2 guys that Jameis threw the ball to multiple times when he was under pressure. Last thing just to note about the Browns, before we get too excited about this team, it is at least worth noting they get the Chargers in Week 9. They go on their bye in Week 10. Week 11, they get the Saints. We'll see what condition the Saints are in. You know, Marshawn Lattimore's dealing with an injury. He's also like a trade block candidate here at the deadline. Then they get the Steelers, the Broncos, the Steelers, and the Chiefs. So that is a tough defensive schedule. So we'll see if these wide receivers can consistently hit that high range of outcomes. But this is a team that was number one in neutral pass rate this year. So there should at least be volume here.
Yeah, volume, and if they play from behind, that's even better for Jameis. I don't care if he throws picks or pick sixes for my fantasy receivers. But also these guys are like most likely somewhat free. You have to pay for them on your waiver wire. So when we add that context into it, yeah, the matchups could be tough some weeks, but I just want these guys on my roster.
All right, let's go to your fourth point that you say people got to keep their eye on.
Yeah, the Bucs backfield continues to evolve, and this past week we saw Rachaad White seeing 56% of the snaps, 12 opportunities, but Bucky Irving 42% of the snaps, 16 opportunities. The most important piece here, Sean Tucker's usage cuts in half from previous weeks, 10% of the snaps, just 3 opportunities. And the craziest thing was, like, this was such a roller coaster of a week for Bucky Irving. I roster him in a ton of leagues where he is a flex option for me, and it starts off with him not practicing back-to-back days. Yeah, he's going to miss is what the reports say. Then he practices Friday all of a sudden, and now he's trending to play. So as a fantasy manager, you have no idea what to do with this information. Is he even healthy? Yeah. They have 2 other running backs. Won't they just lean on those guys? No, it was Bucky Irving leading the backfield with 16 opportunities. An early Rachaad White fumble maybe influences that a little bit, but Irving continued to look good. Over 5 yards per touch. He now ranks top 10 on the season in yards per touch, averaging nearly 6 yards per touch. And in this game, it was who is the Chris Godwin replacement? Who is the Mike Evans replacement? And it turned out it was none of the wide receivers at all. It was Cade Otton, and it was the running backs combining for 12 receptions on 14 targets in this game, and Bucky Irving was leading that cause. So I think moving forward, you can feel good about both Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, but really Bucky Irving to me is the guy that out for this game of 15 points. I still think he's somebody you can buy without spending a fortune on him in trades, and somebody that I want to roster. I look at the fantasy postseason, the Cowboys and the Panthers in the fantasy playoffs for Bucky Irving, who at that point, this could be easily a 2-man backfield. Heck, it could be a 1-man backfield where Bucky Irving is seeing 16 to 18 touches a game consistently. So that's my takeaway from this backfield. Bucky Irving's usage continues to look good, but more importantly, Sean Tucker's usage drops in a game where they needed some more playmakers. They turn to Bucky.
I mean, shoot, dude. I agree. 16, 17, the schedule, Dallas and Panthers, that's great. You don't even have to look that far ahead to see some pretty juicy matchups for old Bucky Irving here. You get they go on bye in week 11, and they do face the Chiefs and the Niners before then. Niners defenses, they can be gashed by some bigger play runs. You just didn't see it on Sunday night because the Cowboys don't have anybody in the backfield who could create a big play. And since we've turned the calendar to like 2020 here, I mean, give me a break with that Dallas running game. Chiefs, Niners, bye in week 11, Giants, Panthers, Raiders. Got a game against the Chargers in here, but like that is just generally a really good schedule for the running backs here.
Yeah, really good schedule. And when you're a guy that's going to go out there and probably get at least 3 check down targets, and in some of these weeks without Chris Godwin, and while Evans remains out for a few more games, yeah, you're probably going to have the upside of a 5+ catch game. So even in these tougher matchups on the ground, they're turning to him in the receiving department. And like they mentioned a couple weeks ago, like we're going to ride the hot hand all season long. It's been like Bucky Irving. When you can just rip off 6 yards per touch, and just watching this guy, like he breaks tackles, he's never going down. He changes the field at some points and goes the completely opposite direction for yardage. Like he's an explosive run machine right now. That's what every offense wants, and that's what the Bucs need right now, explosive plays without their receivers. So I think he's just going to keep getting loaded up and somebody that you can rely on rest of the season, and in my opinion should be trying to trade for as just kind of like a throw into some bigger deals maybe.
Yeah, again, 1-for-1 in positional trades usually not the way to go about this, but just give me like some names of players at the position, maybe some bigger name players at the running back position that you might prefer Bucky Irving over rest of season.
Yeah, so right now, the way that I see it, I think Bucky Irving's in a range with like Ramondre Stevenson. I think he's in a range with Tank Bigsby. I'd probably rather have Bucky over Tank Bigsby. But if you're talking about like across different positions trades, like if I'm somebody who's Michael Pittman, I would trade him away right now if I can get Bucky Irving. I don't even know if the Bucky Irving manager does that, but that's some of the guys that I would be looking at this point, like a Michael Pittman, Jordan Addison, maybe some sort of package deal. Khalil Shakur, for a couple big weeks, you trade him for Bucky Irving. I feel good about that rest of season.
All right, let's get to the secret stat here. Sal Vetri, give me your secret stat here heading into week 9.
Yeah, it's a secret stat about a running back related to his week 8 usage, which was elite for maybe the first time all year, or at least since like week 1, and what he's been doing lately. So I discussed this player actually last week in my Yahoo article as a buy low, and I think that paid off because now you probably have to spend a little bit more for him. He was coming off of a poor week 7 game, didn't even get you 5 fantasy points, and many people were like, let me just put this guy on my bench. I don't want anything to do with him. And I said, I think this guy could be a buy low for us because he's earned 20 plus touches in multiple games this year. And coming off of week 8 now, he earned another 20 plus touches, found the end zone multiple times, and for the 4th time in 8 games, finished as a top 12 running back at the position. So like, all that's great. Like sometimes he works for you, sometimes he doesn't. That's like a boom bust fantasy player, but not the usage you got this last week. 80% of the snaps was a season high. 74% of his team's backfield carries was a season high. But most importantly, he ran 20 routes compared to his backup running back running 5. And that was not the split we were seeing the past month to month and a half of the season. The last time we saw this running back have this type of usage was week 1 and week 2. He went over 20 fantasy points both times, and he was a top 10 running back both times. And moving forward, he gets to face teams like the Bills, the Cardinals, the Colts as he goes into the fantasy postseason. He has a brand new quarterback that seems to be pretty good and moving the offense. So this player is somebody that I want the rest of the season. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to disclose this or let you guess, so I'll just leave that open for you right now.
Yeah. Let me guess it. Is it Ramondre Stevenson?
It is indeed Ramondre Stevenson. Look, this is a guy who's been kind of like up and down, but I think he was injured for the last 3 weeks. We knew that. Like, he almost didn't play in the London game. He like flew last second 6 hours overseas with an injury. You have to sit on a plane, adjust your body, and then he struggles in week 7. Okay, yeah, I could have probably predicted that too for a guy coming off of an injury he wasn't practicing. Now he seems healthy based on this usage, and the 3 times he's seen this type of usage, especially in the receiving department, and that's key, he's had 20 fantasy points. I don't think that happens every time, but I like Drake May. Even if he misses week 9 with the concussion, rest of the season, I like him. I like the schedule for Ramondre. And if he's going to be this 3-down back, how don't we like that in a world where it's rare to find that type of guy in fantasy?
Yeah, this is great. By the way, producer Colin, shout out, great segment idea, because this got my juices flowing. There was like 6 times I almost said his name in my notes, and I had to put this player.
It's
hard. Yeah. Here's where, because at first you started talking, I was like, I have no idea. I know you're a Tyron Tracy guy, so I thought maybe because on the outline it just says secret stat, this running back's elite week 8 usage. And I was like, this has got to be Tyron Tracy because like he just had that electric Monday night game where he did get elite usage. And you called that, by the way, last week, or at least you were like, I don't know, this might not be just like Devin Singletary getting his feet wet. They might be ready to just hand the reins to Tyron Tracy. That is what we saw on Monday night. So that was my first guess. And then at first you started talking, I was like, now I have no idea who the hell he's talking about. Because it wasn't until you said 2 touchdowns and since week 1. And the only reason, Sal, I was able to guess that is because, as I've said on the show before, I do have a suspicious amount of Ramondre Stevenson teams this year. So I've been waiting. Like, let me get where the hell that week 1 performance go? And so much like, dude, enough already with Antonio Gibson. Let's get more Ramondre Stevenson here. And I do think now that he's healthy, I think we could see this. It feels like people still don't really want to believe in Ramondre Stevenson. It feels like kind of the consensus casual view I see whenever I'm doing rankings, whenever I'm just kind of seeing the sentiment out there from people. It feels like people don't really want to buy into this guy. I think maybe it's because it's the Patriots and just some of the recent performances, but I'm glad you pointed out that schedule at the end of the season, which is really nice because I want to buy in on this guy because I drafted quite a lot of him.
Yeah, no, I think you can go ahead and trade for him. I mean, now after a 2-touchdown game, you're going to have to spend more. I think it's still fine, though, because I think people view him as this boomer bust guy. Maybe they're trying to sell high, and you can sneak in for what is a fair deal.
All right, let me tell you what. My secret stat player is not going to get the juices flowing like we just did with Ramondre Stevenson, but we'll see if Sal is able to guess that. On the other side of the break, which we are going to take right now when we get back, I'll get into my 5 stats that I think people need to know right after this. All right, we're back. Let's get into my 5 stats that people need to know heading into week 9. Start off with number 1, fluke or the start of something new with the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray's 8.53 adjusted yards per attempt last week was just the 4th time he's cleared 7.5 since returning from his torn ACL in week 10 of last year. 7.5, pretty like good barometer. Like, all right, we're starting to get somewhere in terms of adjusted yards per attempt if you're not really familiar with that metric. The 4 games were number 1, that first game back, actually, against the Atlanta Falcons, which was interesting in 2023, week 10 last year. The other was week 18 against the Seattle Seahawks, where he did not have Hollywood Brown, but him and Michael Wilson were connecting on a bunch of high leverage contested targets down the field. Week 2 against the Rams, over 12 adjusted yards per attempt. We know that was obviously a massive performance between him and Marvin Harrison. And then again, this past week. So, Sal, when you watch the Cardinals, and I watched a lot of the Cardinals on Sunday, and I just kept saying, like, boom, another Marvin Harrison in breaking route. Boom, another Marvin Harrison in breaking route down the field. A very different type of usage, at least different type of targeted routes, and really just an overall different route tree than what we've seen out of Marvin Harrison Jr. for much of this year. Trey McBride, like I think they worked route concepts with those two guys together in a much better fashion than I saw this year. And I just think Murray played better than he's played for most of this year. So, fluke in week 8 for the Arizona Cardinals, or is this the start of maybe this offense is kind of beginning to figure things out, specifically with their quarterback and their number 1 rookie receiver?
Yeah, I don't think it's a fluke because I believe in the talent, and I think we've already seen it before earlier this year, a similar situation that I can get into in a moment, but it all comes down to the consistency. Yeah, can like this follow over into the next week? Because we saw similar stuff in week 2. Kyler was attacking downfield. It looked great. Maybe some of that was matchup specific. Marvin Harrison got going a little bit in week 2. And then for the last 4 to 5 weeks, Kyler Murray has 2 completions of 20 plus yards from week 3 to week 7. So that's not great. Like where was it that entire time? Why wasn't these explosive plays being schemed up better or being produced? Part of that could be on the offensive coordinator. Part of that can be on the players like Marvin Harrison and Kyler. But in week 8, we got 3 plays of 20 plus yards. When he only had 2 the past month, all 3 of those went to Marvin Harrison. And like you were mentioning, like I do believe the usage changed for him. And since there was a change in usage and we got that more downfield usage in breaking routes, that leads me to believe this isn't a fluke, assuming they continue to do it, which they should moving forward because it worked. So yeah, I think this is great to see. I think everything so far this year, when there's been success for the Cardinals offense, week 1 a little bit, and definitely in week 2, and now in week 8, it's the explosive plays. And every NFL team can say that. Like, we want these explosive 20-plus yard plays, but when they actually start clicking and something changed to cause it, yeah, I can buy in.
Yeah, and look, if you go back and watch that Rams game too, a lot of the bigger plays were on these in-breaking routes. I just feel at times, and I'm not gonna slam the Cardinals coaching staff has been slammed left and right for this. I'm not necessarily gonna slam them for this, but I think at times it has felt like they just did not understand like who Marvin Harrison Jr. was. They looked at sort of big outside receiver, I hate the word, but like generational prospect. Like, yeah, we're going to have him line up at X and do the hardest that you can ask a wide receiver to do. And like, it's just most players don't thrive in that role. In fact, most players, again, maybe we could throw this up on YouTube, like the percentage of routes that Fantasy Points tracks as vertical or static routes. The guys that are on the leaderboard for that, ironically, there's 2 Cardinals receivers there. Most of those guys, like the role kind of stinks for fantasy unless you're like AJ Brown or Tyreek Hill. And like, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is great, but even if he's drafted 4th, like he can be a hit as the 4th overall draft pick and never be as good as AJ Brown. Like it's just a high degree of difficulty role to play. But if you get him on these crossing routes, you get him on these like in-breaking routes and things like that, I think that's actually where Kyler thrives best anyways. So sometimes it just takes a minute for an organization to figure a player out. Hopefully that's what we've got here with Marvin Harrison Jr., the Arizona Cardinals, because the Dolphins were not just some cupcake defense either. I don't know if we pointed this out enough on Sunday, but like that secondary has played well this year. That pass defense overall has played well. The matchups are a little, hit and miss here coming up. I do kind of wonder if the Cardinals are going to be a bit of like a bad defense killer, but we got the Bears in week 9, tough defense. Obviously we got the Jets in week 10. The Jets defense is definitely fallen off from what we've expected. Then they go on bye in week 11, and then there's definitely some more friendly matchups on the other side of that.
Yeah, the matchups are like the concern to why the consistency might not be there moving forward these next couple of weeks or so. But the good thing was that something changed. We saw Marvin Harrison produce, and he was beating Jalen Ramsey at times in this game.
Yeah.
If you're talking about a rookie who's maybe had struggles for a few weeks now, confidence-wise, like that's a huge big up. Jalen Ramsey off of injuries, aging, but I still consider him a very quality cornerback, and many teams would want to have him. So I think moving forward, this is a good thing. We just have to continue to see this usage in the way that they deploy him.
All right, let's get to my second point here, which is I think Chris Olave's big game in week 8 is going a little unnoticed. Like when I pulled up Fantasy Pros to do rankings today, just looking at like the expert consensus, this is a guy that was like outside the top 30 receivers. And it's very early. It's, freaking Tuesday morning. So I think people will bring him up as time goes on. But it does feel like it's gotten a little under discussed that this guy's coming off of a 14 target, 8 catch, 100-yard game, his highest receiving yardage of the season. Also, the usage backs it up too. Chris Olave was targeted on 31% of his routes in week 8. That was his most since week 2. 37% target share, most since week 2. 56.9% air yard share, most since week 2. Can I pose to you, Sal? I think Chris Olave, if you just look at the game logs this year, is actually just the most unlucky receiver in the NFL. And what I mean by that is obviously disappointing start to the season where he has an 11-yard game, but you're blowing out the Panthers. Everything else was working. Sometimes that happens, right? Like sometimes you smash a team by 40 plus points and somebody on the offense isn't necessarily going to eat because you don't need to just unfurl everything. He has a pretty big game, 81 yards. And then he has a stretch of 3 games of over 80 yards. Nothing crazy, not like an explosive, like, oh man, he is winning your fantasy week for you, but quality, productive games against the Cowboys, the Eagles, and the Falcons. Then we get a Saints Chiefs Monday night game in week 5, where I think he came into that game dealing with the hamstring injury that he was gutting out against the Falcons in week 4. He was a little hobbled in that one. Also just a tough matchup against Trent McDuffie. The Saints are like, all right, we're just going to sacrifice a decoy Chris Olave to Trent McDuffie and then whatever. Then week 6, he gets the concussion after just 1 target, 1 catch, 5 yards. He barely runs any routes. He runs a route on, he's only on the field for 3% of the snaps. That's just a tough break. Then he misses a game. I thought he was going to miss the rest of this week 8 game because he took another massive hit and had to go to Spencer Rattler, by the way. He's probably, I would guess he's not going to start another game for the Saints. I know they're hoping to get Carr back soon. But he's got a hospital ball problem, that's for sure. He got blasted again, did Chris Olave, but then he comes back out of the blue tent, for another big game here with 3 red zone targets, 2 targets in the end zone, and 14 targets overall. So I don't know. That was a little bit like ranty. That was a little bit like, look at all this stuff, and I'm a Chris Olave fan, so I think the context is important. But I do think he is a bit unlucky this year, not necessarily like a disappointing player, just a little bit of bad luck, injuries, timings, weird stuff like that. But man, that week 8 usage really, really strong for Olave.
Yeah, look at all this stuff. I'll give you more stuff to look at. You kind of hinted at it. The quarterbacks, Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener, like he was excelling with Jake Haener out there. I mean, part of this is because the competition isn't there. Rashid Shaheed, this was Olave's first game without Shaheed. Olave sees a 36% target share, those 14 targets you were mentioning. Impressive. All the other Saints wide receivers combined saw 3 total targets combined. When you're talking about Mason Tipton, Bum Memes, in and out of the game. I mean, Cedric Wilson is also dealing with injuries now. Like, there's just nobody left on this roster, which they're
about to have to start playing MVS. Like,
yeah,
who they just signed.
I mean, I think Equinemius St. Brown, Amon-Ra's brothers on this depth chart on the practice squad as well. Like, these are the guys who are legitimately coming up to start if they don't make some sort of deal in the coming weeks. So this is a situation where Chris Olave looks really good moving forward. There's some optimism that you get Derek Carr back this week. You have matchups against the Falcons, Rams, Panthers coming up. In the postseason, you get the Raiders, the Packers, the Commanders. That's a fine postseason schedule. Heck, even a good postseason schedule in terms of matchups that can ensue some points. Your one concern would be, like, he's the only guy in this passing attack. Good defenses maybe take that away a little bit, but you would hope that the offense, and as we've seen this year, Clint Kubiak able to scheme his players open like he did this past week when he was the only guy out there with Jake Haener for his quarterback in some of those parts of the game. Yeah, I think that Olave did have a big week. I think the early check for the concussion came back in a slow first half, kind of had people off of him, but you look at the second half and it was massive. I think that continues moving forward.
Yeah, good secondary there in LA too. I mean, they're in negative game script all game, but I think the Saints are going to be in a lot of negative game scripts going forward. So it does feel like Chris Olave is perennially a really good buy low, which is frustrating, but I still want to be ahead of consensus on Chris Olave because I think those big games are coming at some point. All right, number 3 team here. Number 3 stat you need to know. The Steelers' run game is back, baby. I think we were all excited about what is Arthur Smith going to do with these running backs, with this offensive line? There's been injuries on the offensive line. Najee Harris was not necessarily playing well to start the year. I mean, it's been great. The last 3 games since week 6, the Steelers are 8th in overall rushing EPA. Najee Harris specifically is 6th among running backs in yards per game, 5.9 yards per carry, 14.3 explosive rushing rate. Only Sean Tucker ranks higher among running backs with 20-plus rush attempts. You normally don't think of, explosive runs, Najee Harris, but he has been ripping off big runs lately. Only Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor average more yards after contact per attempt among backs with 20-plus rushes. Two things about this. One, been just great. I think it's been great to see Najee Harris just straight up playing better. I talked about this with Nate Tice on the pod last week. I think there's really no other, like, why is Najee Harris playing better other than he's just playing better? He's running a lot harder. It's right about the time that a Colts linebacker called him out for kind of, not being a threatening player. Nate mentioned that he was kind of calling out Harris playing poorly to start the year. I actually had a trade offer from Edwin Porras in one of the leagues I play with him in, where he offered me Najee Harris and Chuba Hubbard for Jaden Reed. I kind of regret not taking that deal, and specifically what I regret saying although I still love Jaden Reed, team's fine. But what I regret is specifically saying to Edwin, I cannot look at Najee on another one of my rosters because he's on a couple of my teams. I'm rejecting this trade. I don't want it simply because I don't want any of Najee Harris. And that was before freaking week 6, I believe Edwin offered that trade. So I'm a little tilted about that. But man, Sal, Najee Harris looking like one of the better backs in fantasy right now.
Yeah, and you talk about he's on a lot of your teams. Same. It felt like every draft I was in, he was the most unsexy pick, but he just fell into the 6th round. He fell to the end of the 6th round. I'll take him here. Yeah, David Montgomery was gone, and you're like, I guess this guy will get 15 to 20 touches, and I'll take it. And that's what he's getting right now. And you mentioned since week 6, that cutoff, since he's had these 100-yard performances every week, he has 11 explosive runs of 10-plus yards. Leads the NFL, by the way. Before week 6, he had 0. He had 0 runs of 10-plus yards. So he's coming together. You mentioned some of the ways that it's happening and some guesses as to why. I think that makes a lot of sense. My only hope right now as they enter the bye week is just let us have nice things, Arthur Smith. Just let this continue. Don't let Cordell Patterson, who's dealing with an ankle injury the past 3 weeks, who you were giving like a featured role in week 4 before he got injured, don't let that muck up this backfield anymore. Like Jaylen Warren's role on 40 to 45% of the snaps, getting targets, seeing 12 opportunities. That's fine. That's fun. Najee Harris seeing 16 to 18 to 20 plus touches in these good game scripts with Russell Wilson leading the offense to touchdown drives right now. And also Russell Wilson attacking deep opens up that running game even more.
Great point.
That's fine. Let's have that continue moving forward. I'm just crossing my fingers coming out of this and entering the final half of the season that we can get more Najee Harris usage. My one concern, if you're a manager and maybe you want to try and sell high right now, is the playoff schedule against the Chiefs, Ravens, and Eagles. That is very scary for a guy who's seeing less passing game usage because of Jaylen Warren being back these last few weeks. Warren's ran more routes so far. So that is my one hesitation with Najee when we look forward all the way into the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, good point. This could end up being the moment to sell high on him. That is definitely for sure. If I can give a little bit of credit to Arthur Smith, though, I know, most fantasy people hate it, but I'm going to do it. I like to do it, so I'm going to do it anyways. Just again, this is from Fantasy Points data. In weeks 1 through 5, the Steelers Najee Harris specifically had 70.7% of his runs on zone run concepts, which is the staple of like typically the Arthur Smith run game. They want to hit these outside zone plays. That just doesn't really fit who Najee Harris is, because he's a pure downhill back, and he's not like a big back like Derrick Henry where you let him get that head of steam on the outside zone runs and then he can just rip it off tackle there. Not the same type of back. Obviously, he's not the explosive runs have come, but he is not typically that fast of a back. In weeks 6 through 8, this stretch that we're talking about here, that zone rushing rate has dropped down to 51.4%, and Harris has 5.4 yards per carry on gap scheme runs in this span. So I think Arthur Smith is like, hey, this is what our best back does well. Let's do more of this. So a little bit of credit to Arthur Smith there. But yeah, always got to have the phantom of Cordell Patterson in the back of your head when you're looking at the Steelers running back room. I'll go to my fourth stat here. The Rams offense that we knew and love, it's all the way back. Again, the Rams are 5th in EPA per play in week 8. They're 6th in offensive success rate overall in week 8. And Puka, he just looks locked and loaded, potentially to be a top 5 wide receiver rest of the way. This is from Nathan Jenke of Pro Football Focus. Puka Nacua was on a snap count. He was indeed on a snap count on Thursday night. So for all the people screaming about, I was told he'd be on a pitch count, he was. He only played 56% of the snaps, only on the field for 67% of the passing plays. The thing is, he was targeted on 40.9% of his routes, which was a career high for a game, as Nate points out. 4.82 yards per route run, 3rd best of his career. And he tied a career high, actually, with 2 rush attempts as well. So, he was on a pitch count. The thing is, when he was on the field, they were pitching the ball to Puka Nacua because he rocks. And he looked fantastic, I thought, against the Vikings. So I'll throw you 2 questions here, Sal. I don't know that we need to do too much analysis on Puka. He rocks. He's a wide receiver 1. Like I said, I think maybe top 5 rest of the season. 1, in my opinion, just off that game and kind of how I felt about these players coming into the year, I do think it's Puka over Kupp kind of convincingly at the wide receiver position. You can tell me if you disagree with that. And secondly, can we get like a Vikings defense check-in? Because this is supposed to be one of the most ferocious kind of defenses in the NFL. Is it time to maybe adjust expectations for this Vikings defense? Or was that just hey, Matthew Stafford and these guys, when they're out there, they can cook on anyone?
Yeah, for your first question, for me, it's Puka Nacua right now. It was coming into the season, and it is right now. It was last year as well. And there were splits when Cooper Kupp was dealing last year, and he was looking better. They look similar on the field together, but we have to add in the entire context of just how they're using Puka on that limited sample, seeing a 40% target rate on his routes run. I don't know if it's going to be that high moving forward, but I feel good that he's going to be number 1 more weeks than not. And when we're just talking about each of these guys' injuries, like Puka Nacua's is one that usually when it heals right now, versus sack, it's healed. Where Cooper Kupp, it seems like this has just been an ongoing issue for him and something that we don't even know if it's going to be something that could be re-injured, especially for an aging wide receiver. So like health-wise, I just feel more confident in Puka, and overall the role I do as well. Like this whole team for the Rams, health has been their thing. Like they're getting their wide receivers back. Their defensive line's getting healthier. Their offensive line, and remember the guy, Tyler Higbee, like he might be back at some point too. Everyone forgets that name as well. So the offense that we saw last year, finally getting healthy, looking good. So I buy into this offense. Like from a fantasy perspective, nobody's trading away Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua when they waited this long and finally got them. Or maybe they already traded for them and they were waiting for this moment and they actually produced. But maybe maybe one guy we can talk about is Blake Corum. Like the last 3 games, he's the only guy behind Kyren Williams, only running back to see a carry or a snap. No more Ronnie Rivers. And Kyren Williams is seeing 20 plus touches a game right now. Like he's been great for fantasy on those, scoring a lot of touchdowns. But this is a guy who's dealt with 3 different ankle foot injuries in 2.5 years. So somebody that maybe Blake Corum shouldn't be available in 85% of fantasy leagues, especially when we talked about at the top of the show, just those teams that, you're 5-3 or 6-2 right now. You're already looking at the postseason. Stash a Blake Corum if you can right now. Check your waivers. And then for the Vikings, yeah, I kind of want to throw them a little bit of bail. Like they faced Ben Johnson and they faced Sean McVay. Sean McVay with like a loaded up team on a short week. So I'll throw them a little bit of bail from there. Ben Johnson only 1 week removed from his bye. Yes, they were facing the Cowboys right off of the bye, but something tells me they were looking ahead to that big matchup against Minnesota for the division lead. He was looking a little bit more into what their defense was doing. So I'll throw them a little bit of bail from that regard, but something to monitor if they can't get it done against Anthony Richardson this week.
Well, the only thing I might disagree with you there is that they were looking ahead to Minnesota, because I think they were clearly looking at how many trick plays can we run to offensive linemen in the fourth quarter preparing for that Cowboys matchup. Right. But otherwise, yeah, I think I agree with you about throwing them a bone there on that one. All right, let's get to my 5th and final stat here, and this is the secret stat. All right, Sal, I want you to guess this quarterback. Over the last 3 weeks, this guy ranks in minimum 2 games played. Not just like some guy played 1 game, whatever. We're throwing all those guys out. So minimum 2 games played among quarterbacks. This guy ranks 8th in deep throw percentage, 5th in air yards per attempt, 2nd in yards on scrambles, 9th in completion percentage over expected per fantasy points data. Everybody's got a completion percentage over expected stat. So I went with theirs because it best fits my narrative on this. Just transparency. And 10th in fantasy points per drop back. This quarterback, Sal Vetri, can you guess this guy?
2 names are in my mind for 2 reasons. You qualified it with 2 starts, and the second in scrambles is like the biggest one. So I got 2 guys in my head right now. I'll go with Bo Nix, I'm hoping is the answer.
Bo Nix is the answer.
Let's go.
Wow, we're 1 for 1 on both of our secret stat guesses. Yeah, Bo Nix. I mentioned him as like a waiver pickup on the last show, and actually looking into how he's performed. Again, I know a lot of people that evaluate quarterbacks and don't like Bo Nix, and I'm not sure if I like Bo Nix or not, but from a fantasy perspective, I kind of like Bo Nix, man. Look, the scrambles, obviously that's critical, but he has at least been, for a guy that, was kind of slammed early on for mostly just being a check down guy, just little Mickey Mouse stuff underneath. And he did do a lot of that in college. He has at least been trying to let it rip the last 3 games. And I think there's been a little bit more confidence from the coaching staff to try to, all right, let's cut out some of the things Bo doesn't do well, but let's hunt for some big plays here. And this is a stretch here the last 3 weeks where one of the games, his number 1 receiver, the only guy who I think is an even average starter at the pass catcher spots, Courtland Sutton, didn't even have a target or didn't have a registered target against the Saints on Thursday night.
Yeah, no, I think that Bo Nix, you look at it, 3 out of the last 4 weeks, a top 10 quarterback for fantasy football. His worst performance during that time is like 14 fantasy points, which even guys like Josh Allen have had multiple stinkers in a row. And you're looking the last 5 to 6 weeks, Sean Payton and Bo Nix right now, it seems like something is going there. It helps when your defense is this good. It has been really good. You're not in situations where Bo Nix is having to force things, having to force throws. A lot of stuff is coming to him right now. You're getting some of those rushing yards as well, a rushing touchdown this past week. So yeah, a lot of leagues where it's a standard quarterback league, you're hoping that you have a better quarterback situation, but there's a lot of good fantasy teams out there that drafted Anthony Richardson, that drafted CJ Stroud, that drafted Patrick Mahomes. And at this point, Bo Nix is somebody that you can throw into your lineup depending on matchup, and he's going to have some nice matchups moving forward that, yeah, you could feel confident about him in there for at least 14 to 15 fantasy points.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those matchups. Week 9 against the Ravens, very beatable secondary. Chiefs in Week 10. I don't know if I'm starting Bo Nix or anybody involved in this outfit for Week 10 against the Chiefs. But Falcons in Week 11, Raiders in Week 12, Browns in Week 13 before they go on their bye in Week 14. They come back on the bye and they face the Indianapolis Colts. Week 17, they get the Bengals. Like, there are some spots here for the Broncos if Bo Nix can kind of keep performing at this level and the usage is at this level. And again, not a lot of dudes we're trying to start in this Broncos offense, but I do think Sutton, who is, I think, still carrying the stink of that 0 spot against the Saints. The Saints do one thing well. They cover the perimeter well when Marshawn Lattimore is healthy. That's like, again, the only thing they do well defensively. So I'm willing to give Courtland Sutton some grace there. But you could probably start Sutton as a wide receiver 3 against the Ravens in some of those other matchups we mentioned. Troy Franklin, they're trying to get him the ball. He's number 2 in routes over the last 3 weeks. It's always kind of an adventure with Troy Franklin. Like, is he going to catch those targets? Because that's kind of the Troy Franklin experience. However, they're at least, again, trying to get him on some big plays, so maybe more of a desperation heave or like a dynasty guy or something like that. So, again, not a ton of like juice to squeeze out of this Broncos offense, but Nick specifically could be a guy that gets you through some tough spots here.
Yeah, Sutton was like the biggest bounce back candidate of all time after not even recording a target in a massive win on Thursday night. Then he comes back for a 100-yard performance. This is also helping just when you're sustaining these drives, when you're getting to the red zone, when you're actually running an efficient offense, it's helping the running backs. Jaleel McLaughlin this past week, and for the past 5 weeks, really, Javonte Williams averaging 18 opportunities per game. Like, that's a guy that I think after a poor performance, had a career high performance, now a poor performance because he doesn't find the end zone. That's a guy that I think you can buy low and have a little bit of trust that this offense isn't going to be one like the Panthers or the Saints that just falls off the rails some weeks.
I made my feelings known about the Javonte Williams stuff on the last podcast, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. Long story short, he's going to go off against the Ravens just because that would make no sense after not going off against the Panthers. That's how it's going to go. All right, Let's take our final break. We come back. Sal's going to give us a couple moves to make here heading into week 9 right after this. All right, we're back. Sal, you got a couple moves for the people to make, both wide receiver related trades. Hit me with the first one.
Yeah, this first one is one that I don't think a ton of people are currently thinking about because Mike Evans is injured, but I think you should buy low on Mike Evans right now, and it really does come down to your team. If you're 3-5, probably not the spot. But honestly, if you're like 4-4 or anything better, depending on where your standings are, how many teams make the playoffs, I think you should go out there and get Mike Evans because we kind of alluded to it at the top of the show. There was a lot of stuff heading into week 8. Who will be the replacement right now? Is it the rookie Jalen McMillan for these Chris Godwin and Mike Evans targets? And it kind of was. He had like 7 targets, didn't do much with them. But for the most part, it was the running backs, it was the tight ends. These wide receivers weren't getting open. Sterling Shepard left with a hamstring injury at one point when he was actually playing. That nice slot role from Chris Godwin. So I really can't trust any of these guys moving forward. I didn't see much in week 8 that made me want to believe in them moving forward. So I'm sitting here saying, I think the answer to who's going to replace them is just Mike Evans when he comes back. And he's not going to have to compete with Chris Godwin the rest of the season. And he's only played in 5 completed games where he started and finished those because of the hamstring twice. And he's had a top 10 finish in 3 out of those 5 games while Chris Godwin was on the field. So I'm looking at it right now, and I feel really good. The fantasy postseason, you get the matchup against the Panthers, the matchup against the Cowboys. Heading into it, like if he comes back in week 11 out of the bye, he'll face the Panthers again, and he'll face the Giants. Like these are all fine to really good matchups for him. So if you could trade right now, like some sort of J.K. Dobbins package for Mike Evans, some sort of maybe Darnell Mooney and a running back package, Darnell Mooney and Tank Bigsby for Mike Evans while he's out the next few weeks, I think that's really good, especially for a team in your league who might be 2-6, who might be 3-5 and just needs to get rid of this guy getting 0 points.
Yeah, the key thing that you mentioned in there is that nobody stepped up in this wide receiver room. And that's not surprising, man. Like I said on the show, I don't think Jalen McMillan's played well this year. Trey Palmer is a guy they've been trying to like minimize in the offense. Otten is a stable factor here. I think Cade Otten's like a tight end 1 rest of the season. You know they're going to throw to the backs, as you mentioned earlier. So, yeah, the fact that we don't have, Jalen McMillan suddenly like a rookie breakout or anything like that, yeah, I think we can comfortably say Mike Evans when he comes back is probably going to dominate that target share. So I like that call. Your second one here is another wide receiver you think people might want to trade for.
Yeah, I think you should send the trade for Jaden Reed right now. And I think it's the perfect time with this Jordan Love day-to-day groin injury to just kind of add even more worry to the Jaden Reed fantasy manager that you might be able to get a discount here. Look, he's coming off of another game where he failed to crack 10 fantasy points. You now look on the season. Through 8 games, 4 of those, Jaden Reed has not cracked 10 fantasy points. So he's had some boom weeks, 30-plus point weeks to open the year, and then he's had a lot of down weeks. But that needs context because in 3 out of those 4 games, Jordan Love wasn't playing or Jordan Love left early when Jaden Reed didn't have at least 10 points. So I'm not as concerned about those down weeks because there's context that needs to be added. You look this past week, according to PFF's data, Christian Watson played more snaps, ran more routes, and saw twice as many targets as Jaden Reed. Okay, that was the first time that's happened this season. That did happen at times last year. But I think it's pretty evident, especially to Matt LaFleur, who's somebody I think is one of the best offensive coordinators in the league, that Jayden Reed is your playmaker. That Jayden Reed is definitely a top 2 receiver, if not the number 1, and I would say he is receiver on this team. So I'm not too worried about the snaps and usage from this past game. I think moving forward, a guy who currently ranks 3rd in fantasy points per target, 3rd in wide receiver EPA, that's how good he is. He's up there in terms of dynamic ability, in my opinion, with the Deebo Samuels and Tyreek Hills, can change the game with one play. Heck, we saw that this past week, a 50-yard reception late in the game that they drew up on the sideline right before that. It was to Jayden Reed. It wasn't to Christian Watson or Romeo Doubs. So moving forward, I think now is the time, even if Jordan Love misses week 9. They go on bye in week 10. He should get healthy. You come out week 11, the big boy part of the schedule for the Packers opens up. If we're talking about real life, they're talking about their division matchups against the Vikings or the Lions, the Bears, the Seahawks and Dolphins are in their playoff teams. They're going to rely on their playmakers in those games, and that's where I think you get even more usage and scheme production for Jayden Reed. So this is a guy moving forward that I believe in, and I think this is like the lowest point on him right now, especially because of this Jordan Love injury.
Yeah, I mean, I was having a big conversation with people in my Discord today about Jayden Reed, so I'm glad that you brought this up because it's just like, I think those big games and the 2 with Jordan Love, and I know I said this on the show, like, yeah, the fact that he had these monster games with Jordan Love and then, the quiet games with Malik Willis in there, I think that really did tell us something about Jayden Reed. But the reality is I think that almost jacked expectations up too high. Like, oh yeah, this guy's a wide receiver 1 rest of the season. He's probably going to be somewhere between where he was producing and where he was drafted. Now, I'm with people that when I see, again, like this morning doing rankings, consensus-wise, he's still like a top 10 ranked wide receiver. I do think we've got to bring that down a little bit. He's probably in this big-ass range of boom-bust wide receiver 2s, but the reality of like, again, people kind of asked me this morning, what's going on here? What's the deal with Jayden Reed? I don't think there's any deal with Jayden Reed. This is a crowded room. But Sal, we talked all offseason about, yeah, this is going to be a crowded room. Right now, this is the last 3 weeks. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players with a double-digit target share on the Green Bay Packers. That is not normal. There's not normally 5 guys, and that's not even, I didn't even count Josh Jacobs in there because I don't think Jacobs has a double-digit target share, but he is a guy that they've been trying to get receiving production out of the running back to. He had his first damn receiving touchdown as an NFL player a couple of weeks ago. So, like, that's just the pass catchers. It's a crowded pass catching room, and they do want to run the ball a little bit. They're not going to ever like be the Browns in terms of number 1 in pass rate over expectation. I lied. Actually, Josh Jacobs does have a double-digit target share in the last 3. So that's 6 players. 6 players with a double-digit target share. Again, very unusual for a team that is never going to be one of the most pass-heavy teams in the NFL or anything like that. It's just going to be crowded. You're just going to have to accept some of that volatility. But I'm with you that I would rather have Reed on my roster than not on my roster. It's going to be frustrating. I'm absolutely with people there. It will be kind of a bumpy road, but I'm with you that at some point, like, they're going to have to they're going to have to get him the ball more over the course of the season. I would love to see Jordan Love just sit out through the bye and get 100% healthy. And yeah, like last point on this, Romeo Doubs has been cooking. Doubs has been earning those targets. He's just gotten better every single year, and I think gets way too much crap from the fantasy community. But if Doubs was to have a stretch of 2 games where he had 4 catches for 65 yards with no touchdowns combined, like Reed has had the last 2 weeks, that would be 0% surprising, because we've seen Romeo Doubs have that stretch of games this year. So we just got to know that this is going to be like a very crowded offense going forward.
Yeah, and I think the thing you mentioned about he's probably valued somewhere between where he was drafted, like a 5th or a 6th round pick, and where he was producing earlier, like a 1st or a 2nd round pick. I think that's spot on. Like, I view him right now as a 4th round fantasy pick if we drafted again today, like right around probably Zay Flowers, Terry McLaurin in terms of receivers. But I think a lot of people view him closer to like that Amon-Ra St. Brown tier of players, like that tier 1 type. And I get it from what he did in the first couple of weeks of the season, but I don't think that was something that we can expect moving forward, these 30-plus yard end-around touchdowns as a consistent piece of his game every week. So, yeah, I think right now, like Jayden Reed, like we talked about Najee Harris earlier, tough playoff schedule, maybe you get a sell-high moment for him. Najee Harris in a lot of leagues, 1-for-1, probably doesn't get it done, although I'm seeing a couple spots on Fantasy Trade Calc where it has happened. Test that one out. Najee Harris plus a package deal if you can, somebody in there. Tank Bigsby with Travis Etienne possibly coming back. These other positional players plus another piece to get a Jayden Reed, I think it's an upgrade. Just keep, like we've been saying, the expectations intact. Don't overpay thinking he's a wide receiver 1.
You don't just have to say that just because I said I regret my non-Jaden Reed for Najee Harris Chuba Hubbard trade.
Man, that kind of went over my head. I guess what do they call that? It was just kind of on there, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Damn, my subconscious brought that back up.
Yeah,
my bad. Let's redo that one, huh?
Nah, that's fine. We'll see what happens. The team has been fine. Although I'm pretty sure we have some tough injuries, so we'll see what happens. Sal, appreciate you, buddy. This was great. Tell the people where they can find you, what you're working on the Yahoo Spaces this week.
Yeah, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, there'll be an article dropping around noon, depending on your time zone each day. Wednesday will be the trades piece. Thursday's the best matchups to exploit. And Friday's the key findings to know heading into your week to win your matchup.
Well, again, that is going to do it for us today. Man, juice is flowing after this Ramondre Stevenson, Bo Nix secret stat stuff. That's going to just fuel me the rest of the day. Crush it out there. Hope you all are crushing it in your fantasy leagues. Like Sal said at the top, this is the time. This is the time to really have some clarity and start making some moves to prepare yourself either for that playoff run or to just simply make it into the dance. In the meantime, we will be back on Thursday. Fantasy Film Room with Nate Tice. We're also going to preview a Thursday Night Football Halloween game between the Texans and Jets. Yeah, should be nice and toxic. Should be a lot of bad vibes on that one, at least on one side of the field. Until then, we are out.